Sprint Mechanics Part 2 for the CSCS exam out of the NSCA textbook. Maximum Velocity Sprint Mechanics. We left off in late flight where we had a concentric hip extension combined with an eccentric knee flexion plus a concentric knee flexion to prevent the leg from the knee from hyperextending and balance out the forces of what is to be braking on early support phase. To minimize the breaking of ground contact of the foot, there is a concentric hip extension. So that means you are actively driving your hip into extension. You're pushing your leg into the ground from the hip. You will resist hip and ankle extension into a hyperextended knee and absorb shock by using see all the phases kind of blend into each other. Concentric knee flexion. So our knee flexes momentarily. There's a knee flexion. So what is concentric knee flexion? Using our hamstrings and gastrocs. And right into eccentric hip extension. So we go from concentric hip extension to an eccentric hip extension, which means the hip extensors, hamstrings and glutes, are now lengthening and it is softening. So yeah, to absorb shock. So there's a softening. Because yeah, if we jam our leg right down into the ground, we'll break. We'll lose momentum doing that, or speed. Momentum is mass times velocity. It's another measure of power. It's another equations I have to memorize for the exam. Also to absorb shock and to control tibial rotation over the ankle, like to keep your knee from going over your toe, is you use an eccentric plantar flexion. So your gastrocs, your plantar flexors, right? So you're going to go like this when you land, right? So here's your foot. I might get this in the way. Your foot goes like this. It dorsiflexes. It's not called dorsiflexion. It's an eccentric plantar flexion because we're not actively dorsiflexion. We're using an eccentric. The shock, the mass, our momentum, our mass is sinking onto the ankle, and so the ankle is compressing. And to control that compression, the ankle extensor, which would be plantar flexion, the muscle action is the lengthening of those that plantar flexing muscle is so it's eccentric plantar flexion. And then we go into LS, late support. So we went from early support to late support. Just wondering, I totally forgot if I explained what the first video was flight phases. Now we're in stance or support phases. So we went from flight, early support, late flight, early support, late support. In late support, we're decelerating the thighs, backward rotation. Because now we're on top of that leg. We're moving forward. We're standing on that leg. We're rotating our trunk for takeoff, and to decelerate this leg and to rotate the body forward, because there's a lot of contralateral and counter rotation movement going on, we use eccentric hip flexion. So our hip flexors are lengthening. They're balancing out a lengthening. They're breaking hip flexors, eccentric hip flexion. So our hip flexors are stretching out. We're breaking that force because we're carrying over that leg. So our leg is whizzing behind us as we're passing over it. But to stop that, we have to break with the antagonist to the flexor. Right? We're not flexing. The muscle's extending, but we're going to use an eccentric muscle action by way of the hip flexors. Now, to propel our center of gravity forward, we're going to have two muscle actions involved. A concentric knee extension, so we're actively pushing off at the knee. So here's our toe off, and concentric plantar flexion. I think I figured this out. I feel so good. I got to tell somebody. Nobody cares. Concentric plantar flexion. So now the knee is extending and the foot is pushing off, and that's toe off. And we go right into early flight, which starts with eccentric hip flexion, eccentric knee extension. Because now all that stuff that we just did, we got to undo and cycle it back over again. And so while one leg is doing this, the other leg is doing it too, but in a different phase. Anyway, I think I understand now, and I hope that helps you if you see this before your exam. If anybody sees this, I don't know how anybody's going to find it.